Hello there and welcome back to the Sleep Science. Tonight we're drifting into the long, winding story of you, me, and everyone you've ever known, because all of us share the same deep evolutionary roots. Picture yourself padding barefoot through a vast, humid forest in eastern Africa, somewhere around 6 million years ago. The trees arch overhead, tangled vines hang like curtains, and the air smells of wet earth. Shadows shift at the edges of your vision. Maybe a leopard, maybe just the breeze. The ground is uneven, branches snap underfoot, and yet something astonishing happens. Your ancestors straighten their backs and take hesitant, upright steps. It's not graceful, not yet, but it is the first wobbling rehearsal for the marathon of human history. You probably won't survive this jungle, if we're being brutally honest, but don't worry. You're here only as a dreamlike observer. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love it if you posted your location and local time in the comments below. It's fascinating to see this sleepy little community scattered across the planet. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the forest, watching a small group of ape-like beings huddle together. They are Australopithecines, and while they still climb trees, they're starting to prefer walking on two legs when the ground clears. Bipedalism is their risky new trick. It makes them slower climbers, more vulnerable to predators, but it frees their hands. Imagine scratching your head, carrying food, or, my personal favorite, gesturing dramatically during arguments. That last one might be the most human trait of all. Historians still argue whether upright walking began as a way to spot predators across tall grass, or simply as an energy-efficient method of moving between scattered trees. Either way, it's a gamble that pays off over millions of years. Upright stance changes everything. Hips shift, spines curve, skulls balance differently. Your species' story is literally built on an aching back. The mainstream historical fact here is that Australopithecus afarensis, famously nicknamed Lucy, walked upright in Africa about 3.2 million years ago. She's the celebrity fossil of paleoanthropology, and you can picture her striding awkwardly but confidently across volcanic ash plains. The quirky tidbit: some scientists once theorized that standing up was partly for wading through water, freeing arms for scooping tasty aquatic snacks. It's not the most widely accepted idea, but it does conjure up a funny picture of proto-humans wadding around like tall ducks. You move with the group as they shuffle along a riverbank, nibbling on fibrous plants and the occasional juicy fruit. They don't yet understand family the way you do, but they huddle, groom, and protect one another. Predators lurk everywhere. Saber-toothed cats, giant eagles, crocodiles that make today's look like plush toys. Being small and upright isn't exactly a survival cheat code, but somehow, against the odds, the lineage endures. The forest floor feels spongy beneath your imagined feet, littered with fallen figs and the crunch of nutshells. You sense how precarious survival is here. Every rustle could mean danger. Every shift in weather could strip the group of food. And yet, in this fragile balance, the seeds of humanity are germinating. The slow stretch of evolution doesn't come with drum rolls or confetti. It's just one foot in front of the other, repeated across hundreds of generations until one day, someone notices they've walked out of the trees and into history. And so, in the dappled light of this ancient African forest, you drift forward, your shadow taller, your hands freer, your path uncertain. The slow evolution of Homo Sapiens has barely taken its first step. You follow the group out of the thicker forest and into a patch of open savanna, where the tall grass sways like a restless sea. The sun presses hard on your shoulders, and you notice something scattered across the ground: sharp flakes of stone. At first glance, they look like natural shards, but if you crouch closer, You can see their edges glinting. These aren't accidents, they're the clumsy handiwork of your early ancestors. The invention of stone tools is often dated to about 2.6 million years ago, and it changes everything. Imagine cracking a bone open with your bare hands, frustrating, slow, and not very effective. Now imagine holding a flaked stone with a razor edge. Suddenly, marrow and meat become accessible, calories multiply, survival odds shift. It's like upgrading from a butter knife to a chef's cleaver. Your knuckles might ache from the awkward hammering, but the rewards outweigh the bruises. Historians still argue whether early humans invented tools independently in different places, or whether the knowledge spread slowly from one group to another. What's certain is that tool making marks a cognitive leap. It requires planning, patience, and the ability to picture a goal in your head before your hands get there. It's not art yet, but it's the first draft of creativity. The mainstream fact here: the Alduin tool industry, named after Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, represents humanity's first consistent toolkit. Those chunky flakes and hammerstones may look unimpressive in a museum case, but they're the beginning of technology. The quirky tidbit: some researchers think the earliest tools might have been used as much for cracking nuts as for hunting, so you can thank prehistoric trial and error every time you eat pistachios. You picture a scene: a group huddled around a fallen carcass, vultures circling overhead. They're not the ones who brought the antelope down. That credit goes to a lion pride now lounging in the shade, bellies swollen. Once the predators wander off, the hominids creep in. With their sharp stones, they slice scraps of meat off the bones, hearts pounding at the possibility of being noticed. Scavenging is dangerous, but protein is precious. You can almost hear the crunch of bone under a hammerstone, the slurp of marrow, the nervous laughter as they hurry away. And of course, where there are tools, there are accidents. You can imagine countless prehistoric ouch moments: cut fingers, smashed thumbs, maybe the occasional dramatic overswing. Archaeologists even find fossil bones with strange cuts, raising the uncomfortable question: were those marks from butchering animals or something darker? Scholars still debate whether early hominins ever dabbled in cannibalism out of desperation. Don't worry, though. You're just a sleepy observer, safe from sharp edges. As twilight falls over the savannah, sparks of ingenuity glitter like fireflies in the dusk. These chipped stones don't look like much, but they'll open the path to everything from axes to iPhones. And while your knuckles throb sympathetically, you realize every cracked stone edge is another step toward becoming fully human. Night creeps over the savannah, and for the first time, the darkness feels less overwhelming. A faint orange glow flickers between a ring of stones. You move closer, eyes watering from the smoke, and there it is, the heartbeat of human civilization: fire. The control of fire probably dates back at least 1 million years, though historians still argue whether the earliest evidence is natural lightning strikes or true human tending. Some say Homo erectus learned to borrow flames from wildfires, carrying smoldering branches until they sputtered out. Others argue for deliberate fire-making much earlier. Either way, the scene before you is undeniable. A small group sits around a crackling blaze, shadows stretching long across the ground. The mainstream fact here is that charred bones and ancient hearths, especially from sites in Africa and Israel, reveal repeated use of fire about 790,000 years ago. The quirky tidbit: some ancient humans may have used fire to smoke out honeybees, stealing their honey. So the sweet tooth that keeps you raiding the fridge at midnight might be older than you think. You settle in beside the warmth. The fire's benefits are immediate. Roasted tubers become digestible, meat cooks safely, and dangerous pathogens shrivel away in the flames. Cooking changes not just diet but biology: smaller teeth, shorter guts, more energy available for the brain. Imagine your ancestors squinting at a burnt antelope leg and deciding, Yep, this is fine. Congratulations. You're witnessing the world's first barbecue, minus the sauce. There's another advantage you feel even more keenly. Firelight stretches the day. In the glow, people sit awake longer, eyes glittering, voices low. You catch the soft hum of early chatter, maybe not full language yet, but more than grunts. Historians still argue whether sitting around fires is where storytelling truly began, but you can't help noticing how the rhythm of flames invites imagination. A crackle here, a pop there, and someone gestures with a bone, miming a hunt gone wrong. The group laughs. Fire becomes theater. Of course, there's a downside. Smoke stings your lungs, makes your throat rough. Even now, modern humans carry respiratory scars from generations of smoky shelters. But maybe the trade-off is worth it. Fire chases away predators. Hyenas skulk at the edge of the light but don't dare approach. You can almost hear their laughter fade into the darkness. And yet you can picture the hazards too. Flames leaping onto dry grass, huts collapsing in sparks, children singeing their hair. Some early bands probably feared fire as much as they relied on it, like keeping a pet dragon that sometimes bites back. Still, your ancestors persist, learning to coax the flames into something steady. The night deepens, but the circle around the fire glows with more than warmth. It glows with connection, curiosity, and just a pinch of smoke-induced coughing. You realize in this orange halo that humanity's path is lit not only by sunlight but by sparks stolen from the sky and claimed as our own. The fire fades into embers, and when dawn comes, you find the group on the move. Dust rises under their bare feet as they follow a slow trail northward, leaving behind the familiar forests of Africa. This is no sprint. Migration for early humans is more like a shuffle spread across thousands of years. Step by step, generation by generation, they drift into unfamiliar lands, and you drift along with them. Historians still argue whether Homo erectus was the first to leave Africa nearly 2 million years ago, or whether later species like Homo Sapiens made the great journeys in several waves. Either way, the path winds through green valleys, across deserts, and over rivers. Imagine the courage, or perhaps the sheer lack of choice, required to wander into landscapes with unknown predators and plants that may or may not poison you. The mainstream fact here: fossils of Homo erectus have been found as far afield as Georgia, China, and Indonesia, showing that our ancestors had spread astonishingly far by 1 million years ago. The quirky tidbit: one set of footprints in Saudi Arabia suggests that ancient humans might have been beachcombers, ambling along ancient lake shores. Picture your ancestors strolling the water's edge like prehistoric tourists, shells crunching beneath their toes. You walk through heat and dust, hearing the crunch of gravel underfoot. Nights are colder now, and the air feels sharper, less humid than the African forests. The food changes too. Roots give way to grains, game animals to herds of wild cattle or deer. Adaptation becomes survival. The travelers so crude hides together, their fingers clumsy but determined, and you can almost feel the scratch of fur against your own skin. And of course, it's not just empty landscapes out here. You stumble across signs of other beings, stone tools, bones, footprints that don't quite match the ones you're following. These are cousins, parallel experiments in humanity. The migration isn't just outward, it's into neighborhoods already occupied. You sense the tension, strangers meeting strangers with no idea whether to fight, flee, or share a fire. Historians still debate what pushed people to move at all. Was it shifting climate, dwindling resources, or simple curiosity? Maybe it was all three. Whatever the reason, the slow march out of Africa reshaped not only human history but the whole planet. By the time you pause on a rocky hillside and look back, the homeland feels far away, almost like a dream. And yet the walk continues. Feet blister, fires sputter out, Storms lash the travelers, but the horizon always beckons. You realize with a kind of sleepy awe that the very act of wandering, of never quite being content to stay put, is stitched deep into the human story. The path north carries you into colder valleys and shadowed caves, and there, waiting with quiet patience, are your distant cousins, the Neanderthals. You spot them first by their sturdy shapes, broad shoulders, heavy brows, thick fingers wrapped around stone tools. They don't look exactly like you, but the resemblance is uncanny. It's like meeting a sibling you never knew existed, one who spent more time in the gym and less time in poetry class. Neanderthals thrived across Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, adapting to the Ice Age climates that froze rivers solid and covered valleys in glaciers. The mainstream fact here is that their brains were as large, sometimes larger than modern humans. They weren't the grunting, dim caricatures old textbooks suggested. They had culture, tools, and likely speech. The quirky tidbit. Archaeologists once discovered what looked like eagle talons shaped into jewelry, suggesting Neanderthals may have invented accessories long before Paris Fashion Week. You slip into a limestone cave with them, the ceiling dripping with mineral tears. A fire smolders in the center, smoke curling up into the dark. The air smells of roasted meat and damp stone. Neanderthals huddle in furs stitched crudely but effectively, the pelts smelling of musk. One sharp-eyed hunter eyes you suspiciously, as though deciding whether you're friend, foe, or just another odd dream passing through. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals and Homo Sapiens coexisted peacefully, fought bitterly, or simply ignored each other most of the time. Evidence suggests all three, depending on the place and period. Imagine sharing a valley where two groups eye each other across a river. Do you trade firewood, steal food, or teach one another new tricks? You notice how practical the Neanderthals are. Their tools are carefully flaked, their shelters sturdy, their diets rich in protein. They know how to hunt reindeer across frozen plains, how to survive in caves where the wind claws at the entrance. There's strength in their way of living, though perhaps less flexibility than the more wandering bands of Homo sapiens. And then there's the softer side, graves with flowers tucked inside, bones carefully arranged. Were these rituals or just practical burials to keep predators away? Scholars still debate, but kneeling there, watching petals crumble in the dirt, you can't help but feel the tug of kinship. These are not strangers, they are family. You leave the cave with the lingering smell of smoke in your hair, the echo of guttural voices in your ears. Neanderthals remain behind, their silhouettes framed by flickering firelight. You sense that their time is finite, but for now, their story runs alongside yours, parallel and intertwined. The family tree feels messier and richer than you ever imagined. You step out of the cold cave air and follow a winding trail that leads not just through valleys, but through the genetic corridors of time. The Neanderthals you left behind don't vanish from your story. They seep into it, quite literally, through the mingling of DNA. Picture an awkward campfire meeting, two groups sizing each other up, deciding whether to exchange tools, insults, or something more intimate. The outcome lingers in you today, woven into the blueprint of your cells. The mainstream fact is that modern non-African humans carry about 1–2% Neanderthal DNA, a quiet inheritance that influences everything from immune response to skin sensitivity. The quirky tidbit: some of those genes are linked to things like circadian rhythm, depression, and even nicotine addiction. So the next time you blame yourself for staying up too late or sneaking another smoke break, you could half-jokingly point to your Neanderthal great-great something. Historians still argue whether this interbreeding was rare and sporadic, or whether it happened many times in many places. Some suggest alliances formed during lean winters, when sharing more than just food meant survival. Others see it as opportunistic encounters, fleeting and pragmatic. Whatever the reality, your genome tells the truth. Humanity is less pure lineage and more patchwork quilt. As you drift deeper into this genetic twilight, you imagine the encounters themselves. A shared hunt for mammoth across icy plains. A tense but curious exchange of stone tips and firewood. Perhaps even the hush of voices blending in the dark, hesitant but willing. It's hard not to romanticize, though the reality was probably far more complicated and, let's be honest, awkward. And the mingling didn't stop with Neanderthals. Farther east, other archaic humans, the Denisovans, left their mark. Their DNA survives especially in populations of Asia and Oceania, shaping traits like high-altitude adaptation in Tibetans. That's right. The reason some people can hike Everest without collapsing might trace back to a long-forgotten rendezvous in a mountain cave. Evolution really does have a sense of humor. You pause, listening to the quiet beat of your own heart. Within that rhythm lies a chorus of voices, ancient, mingled, and sometimes contradictory. The story of Homo Sapiens isn't a clean line. It's a tangle of crossings, detours, and late-night campfires where strangers became family. So when you look around at the people of the modern world, you're not seeing neat categories. You're seeing mosaics, each face carrying fragments of encounters older than memory. Every handshake, every conversation, is a reunion of genes that once met under very different stars. The mingling of DNA lingers in your mind like a ghostly chorus as you follow the trail onward. One night, the group gathers again around a fire, but this time something new stirs in the crackling glow. A figure leans forward, lips parting, and instead of the usual guttural sounds or gestures, you hear something startling, structured sounds, syllables that carry shared meaning. Language, fragile and tentative, is being born on the tip of the tongue. The mainstream fact is that scholars generally agree Homo sapiens developed complex language tens of thousands of years ago, though the exact timing is a mystery. The quirky tidbit: some linguists believe that whistled languages, like the kind still practiced in parts of the Canary Islands and Turkey, may echo ancient forms of long-distance communication across valleys. Imagine early humans whistling gossip across canyons like prehistoric bird calls. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals had language equal to ours, or whether their speech was more limited. Some fossils suggest they had the vocal anatomy, but whether their brains strung words together like poetry remains uncertain. You picture them muttering in clipped tones, while sapiens on the other side of the valley are already dabbling in bedtime stories. You listen closely. At first the sounds are simple, warnings of predators, signals about food, grunts turned into sharp cries. But then the words stretch, weaving into phrases that describe things not immediately present. Tomorrow's hunt, yesterday's storm, a friend who wandered too far. This is the true magic trick of language, pulling the invisible into the room. Suddenly, memory and imagination can be shared instead of locked in a single skull. The firelight paints faces in gold, and you can almost feel the electricity between them. Laughter bubbles up at a clumsy imitation of a mammoth's trumpet. A hush falls when one elder strings together words to describe the stars overhead. It's not Shakespeare, but it doesn't have to be. The rhythm of speech itself becomes glue, binding the group tighter. And of course, where there is language, there are arguments. You overhear a squabble about who gets the best piece of roasted marrow bone, and while it may sound petty, it's actually monumental. Complex disagreements require words. Compromise requires persuasion. Humans are inventing politics one insult at a time. The air cools, but the voice is warm. You realize you're witnessing the dawn of storytelling, gossip, lullabies, and, inevitably, complaining. These sounds, spilling into the night, will echo through millennia, eventually filling libraries, courtrooms, and yes, even YouTube comment sections. And as you close your eyes, you wonder, maybe the first true spark of humanity wasn't fire at all, but words whispered across a campfire, weaving minds together in the dark. The voices you heard last night trail into the dawn, and as the sun rises, you notice something unusual on the walls of a nearby cave. You step closer, fingers brushing cool limestone, and there it is. The first flicker of imagination turned permanent. Shapes scratched with ochre, handprints blown like stencils, animals stretching across the rock face in lively arcs. You've stumbled into the gallery of humanity's earliest artists. The mainstream fact is that some of the oldest confirmed cave paintings, like those in El Castillo in Spain, are over 40,000 years old. But the quirky tidbit: in 2018, scientists announced that Neanderthals themselves may have painted at least some of these early works, using red pigment dots and hand stencils. So yes, your thick-browed cousins might have beaten you to the first art exhibition. Historians still argue whether these markings were mere decoration, hunting magic, or a spiritual attempt to connect with unseen worlds. Was the bison painted on the wall meant to summon real bison into tomorrow's hunt, or simply to pass a long winter night? Nobody knows. You kneel on the cave floor, dust settling around you. A figure presses their hand against the wall and blows pigment through a hollow bone, leaving behind a perfect red silhouette. You feel the gesture ripple through time. It's not just a handprint, it's a declaration. I was here. Remember me. The first signature, long before contracts or selfies. Nearby, someone carves a small figurine from ivory, a rotund human shape with exaggerated curves. Later generations will call her the Venus of Willendorf, but in this moment, she's a symbol whose meaning only her maker truly knows. Fertility charm, idle doodle, early gag gift. Scholars debate endlessly, but you can almost hear the chuckles of the carver, tongue between teeth in concentration. The cave smells of damp stone and charred pine resin from torches. The flickering light makes the animals on the walls seem alive, charging and twisting in the shadows. You sense that this isn't just art, it's theater, ritual memory. Children gape wide-eyed, adults nod solemnly. In this dim chamber, imagination itself becomes a survival tool, keeping traditions alive when words aren't enough. And of course, there's playfulness too. You can picture someone sneaking in later to add an extra tail to a painted horse, the Paleolithic version of doodling a mustache on a portrait. Humor, as always, refuses to stay behind. As you leave the cave, the sunlight feels harsher, the outside world rougher. But you carry with you the faint red handprint, the first evidence that humans don't just live in their world. They insist on leaving marks, even when no one else is watching. You step away from the painted cave walls and wander into a wide, open meadow where the air smells of grass and damp soil. Here, survival is less about brushes of ochre and more about filling stomachs. You join a group as they scatter to forage. Some dig for roots with pointed sticks, others pluck berries, and a few sling crude spears across their shoulders, ready to chase antelope across the plains. Welcome to the life of hunting and gathering, part workout, part buffet, and sometimes part disaster. The mainstream fact is that for roughly 95% of human history, your ancestors lived as foragers. Farming, that thing you associate with civilization, is only a very recent blip. The quirky tidbit: archaeologists once found evidence that some Paleolithic people ate roasted snails in Spain around 30,000 years ago. So yes, fancy French cuisine has prehistoric street cred. Historians still argue whether hunter-gatherers had harder lives than early farmers. Some point out that foragers often had more leisure time than the later plow-pushing peasants, while others argue that constant movement and uncertain food supplies made things precarious. You watch as a group struggles to drag down a wild boar, and you can feel both sides of the debate in your bones. The sensory details are vivid. The crunch of nuts between teeth, the tang of wild onions dug from the soil, the greasy smoke of roasting meat. Food is shared communally, and while no one goes home with a packed lunch, most survive well enough. Yet you also notice the risks. One wrong mushroom can knock out an unlucky forager, and an overeager spear thrust can mean a broken ankle instead of dinner. The midnight snacks you crave today. Back then, they were more like midnight scavenge what hyenas left behind. You pause at the edge of a marsh where reeds sway and frogs croak in chorus. A young hunter stoops, plucking shellfish from the water, while another enthusiastically smears honey across their face after raiding a bee's nest. The sweetness drips down their chin, sticky but triumphant. You can almost taste it yourself, though you're also imagining the bee stings that must have come first. What you realize here is that hunting and gathering isn't just survival, it's knowledge. Every member of the group carries a mental map of edible plants, migration routes, and seasonal cycles. Forgetting means hunger, remembering means life. And when the group curls up to sleep under the stars, bellies full and fire glowing, there's a sense of rhythm to it all, as if life itself is tied to the pulse of the land. And yet, as you drift with them, you sense a change brewing. Seeds and soil whisper possibilities. The rhythm of movement will soon give way to something heavier, staying in one place. But for now, you chew on roasted roots beside the fire, savoring the ancient equivalent of comfort food. You wake to find the group lingering in a valley instead of packing up their tools to move on. The air feels different, less hurried, more rooted. Someone scatters seeds across a patch of damp earth, and though it seems laughably optimistic at first, weeks later tiny green shoots push through the soil. You're watching the dawn of farming, the great gamble that reshapes everything about being human. The mainstream fact is that agriculture began independently in multiple regions about 10,000 years ago. Wheat and barley in the Fertile Crescent, rice in China, maize in the Americas. The quirky tidbit: one of the earliest domesticated crops was the bottle gourd, not for food, but as a handy prehistoric Tupperware. Practicality beats gourmet. Historians still argue whether farming was a triumph or a tragedy. On one hand, it provides surplus food, supports larger populations, and lays the groundwork for civilization. On the other, it chains people to one place, spreads diseases in crowded villages, and forces bodies to stoop and ache in endless labor. Imagine trading a varied diet of berries and venison for a lifetime of back pain and porridge. Not exactly a glowing endorsement. You squat beside a woman crushing grains with a heavy stone, the air dusty with flour. Children chase goats through the settlement, their laughter mixing with the bleats. Chickens peck at crumbs near the fire. There's a coziness here, warm bread baking on flat stones, smoke rising lazily into the morning air. But you also notice the cracks. Stored grain attracts rodents. Close quarters spread lice and coughs. Foragers could leave behind bad seasons. Farmers are stuck watching their crops fail. Still, the transformation is undeniable. Goats are no longer just prey but property. Dogs hover faithfully near the edges, guardians and companions. You hear someone humming as they scatter seeds, as if singing to the soil might coax it into generosity. Farming isn't just technique, it's ritual, hope, and a stubborn refusal to starve. And yet, as you wipe grain dust from your hands, you feel the weight of this shift. The slow freedom of the wandering life is ending. In its place, fences, harvests, and the first whispers of ownership. Humanity has tethered itself to the ground, and in doing so, tied itself to a new kind of future. The fields ripple in the breeze, and with them comes something entirely new: permanence. No longer drifting endlessly, the people around you begin to build sturdier huts, circle their settlements with rough fences and carve paths that look suspiciously like streets. Villages are taking shape, and with them comes an entirely different kind of survival, one measured less by saber-toothed tigers and more by whether your neighbor's goat keeps eating your grain. The mainstream fact here is that sites like Saddlehuruk in modern Turkey, around 9,000 years old, reveal densely packed mud brick houses without streets, where people clambered across rooftops to visit each other. The quirky tidbit: some of those houses contained wall paintings of erupting volcanoes, possibly the world's first disaster art. Even then, humanity couldn't resist making commentary about natural chaos. Historians still argue whether early villages were egalitarian or already sliding into hierarchies. Some evidence suggests relative equality, while other signs hint at leaders, shamans, or families with better access to goods. You can almost hear the first village gossip. "Oh, so-and-so has the bigger storage jar, must be nice." You wander down a narrow lane where smoke curls from clay ovens. The smell of baking bread mingles with the less charming scent of manure. Chickens flap in dusty courtyards, and dogs weave between legs, tails wagging. Children play at the edge of a ditch, tossing pebbles into the murky water. It's cozy, but crowded. Diseases that once burned themselves out in small nomadic bands now settle in for long, miserable visits. You notice someone coughing in the shadows, and you suddenly understand how plagues will one day hitch rides through the arteries of villages and cities. And then there's gossip. With people packed close together, privacy shrinks. Who planted too late, who hoards grain, who secretly visits whose hut after dark. It's all whispered and exaggerated. Language, born by firelight, now thrives in the alleys of permanent settlements. It's the Paleolithic equivalent of a neighborhood Facebook group, complete with petty arguments and unsolicited advice. Still, there's warmth here. A neighbor helps repair a roof, another shares leftover stew, children are raised communally. Humanity, for all its bickering, seems wired for cooperation, yet you sense how fragile it is. A drought or bad harvest could turn friendliness to rivalry, fences to boundaries, neighbors to competitors. As night falls, lamps flicker in tiny windows and the village hums with quiet domestic rhythms. The scrape of grinding stones, the soft thud of weaving looms, the whisper of voices carrying across walls. You realize that humans have created not just a settlement, but a stage for every drama still to come. Love, jealousy, alliance, betrayal, all squeezed into a few muddy streets. Morning comes, and the village you left behind seems almost quaint compared to what now rises before you. Clay huts give way to stone walls, dusty paths become broad avenues, and at the center stands something utterly new: power carved into architecture. Kings, myths, and tax collectors are stepping onto the stage, and you're about to learn that the price of civilization is paperwork. Well, claywork at first. The mainstream fact here is that one of the earliest true civilizations, Sumer in Mesopotamia around 5,000 years ago, developed city-states with rulers, temples, and yes, organized taxation. The quirky tidbit: some of the earliest written tablets aren't epic poems or philosophical musings, but simple receipts for beer rations. Priorities have always been priorities. Historians still argue whether kingship began as a spiritual role, priests elevated to manage rituals, or as brute political dominance. You stroll through a bustling marketplace where farmers unload sacks of grain, potters arrange wares, and scribes with ink-stained fingers tally everything up. Somewhere nearby, a priest chants to the gods for rain, while a tax collector quietly counts how much of that rain will end up in storage for the ruling elite. The sensory barrage is dizzying. The clang of bronze tools, the bleating of goats herded into pens, the smell of incense burning at a temple altar. A procession winds past you, drums thudding as a king in embroidered robes raises his arms. People bow, some reverently, others reluctantly. You sense the double-edged sword of hierarchy, unity under a leader, but also inequality etched into daily life. Stories now carry more than gossip. They become myths, grand narratives of gods shaping rivers, of heroes slaying monsters. You hear one sung by a storyteller in the square, their voice rising above the crowd. These tales explain floods, droughts, and the unfairness of life. They soothe, inspire, and justify why some people sit on thrones while others haul bricks. And of course, there's bureaucracy. You can almost feel the collective groan of villagers as officials tally grain taxes or demand labor for building projects. One man mutters about hiding a portion of his harvest, only to discover the collectors are surprisingly good at math. Complaining about taxes, you realize, is as old as taxes themselves. Yet beneath the layers of control and burden, there's beauty too. Carved statues gleam in courtyards, music drifts from reed pipes, and trade brings spices and shells from faraway lands. Humanity has scaled up cooperation to a dazzling, if sometimes oppressive, level. Civilization is both a symphony and a cage, and you walk its avenues with equal parts awe and unease. The city streets fade into the horizon, and before long you hear something new: the creak of timbers, the flap of canvas, and the salty hiss of waves against a hull. You find yourself standing on a shoreline dotted with boats, sails straining against the wind. Oceans, once barriers, are now turning into highways. Humanity has learned to ride the waves. The mainstream fact is that by around 3,000 years ago, civilizations like the Phoenicians were expert sailors, crisscrossing the Mediterranean with cargoes of purple dye, timber, and wine. The quirky tidbit: Polynesian navigators steered vast canoes thousands of miles across the Pacific, guided by nothing more than stars, swells, and bird flight patterns. Imagine trusting your life to the subtle tilt of ocean waves. No GPS, just goosebumps. Historians still argue whether long-distance voyaging was sparked by necessity, curiosity, or sheer accident. Was the first island discovered by intent, or by a desperate sailor blown off course? Whatever the case, you're watching the world shrink as cultures once isolated begin to weave together. You climb aboard a ship, the planks sticky with tar and smelling of salt. Sailors haul ropes with calloused hands, their chants rising above the crash of surf. The wind whips your hair, the horizon stretches endlessly, and suddenly the world feels both enormous and strangely within reach. At night, the stars blanket the sky, constellations doubling as maps. A navigator points, murmuring the path etched in the heavens. But travel isn't just about trade goods. With every crossing comes the mingling of ideas, songs, and, unfortunately, diseases. A sailor coughs near the bow, and you feel the uneasy truth. Microbes hitch rides as eagerly as spices and stories. Whole populations will one day reel from infections carried silently across the waves. Still, there's wonder here. Exotic shells exchanged for metals, fables whispered from one language to another, recipes traded like secrets. You watch as strangers greet on a dock, unsure whether to shake hands, trade gifts, or glare suspiciously. Humanity, it seems, is always negotiating the fine line between friendship and conquest. The salty spray cools your face, and as the ship creaks into the open sea, you realize that humans have never been content with shorelines. They will sail, explore, and sometimes stumble, always chasing what lies beyond the horizon. You disembark from the creaking ship into a bustling port city, where something curious catches your eye, not the merchants hawking spices or the priests chanting by a temple, but a scribe hunched over a slab of clay. His reed stylus scratches quickly, leaving neat wedge-shaped marks. You lean closer and realize you're witnessing another quiet revolution, the birth of writing. The mainstream fact is that the earliest known writing systems, cuneiform in Mesopotamia and hieroglyphs in Egypt, emerged over 5,000 years ago. The quirky tidbit: some of the very first written messages weren't epic tales but brewery notes, tracking who got how much beer. Humanity, ever consistent, has always documented what matters most. Historians still argue whether writing developed primarily for record-keeping, religious ritual, or storytelling. Looking at the tablet before you, filled with numbers and grain counts, you suspect bureaucracy had the upper hand. Yet nearby, on a temple wall, symbols tell a grander story. Gods bending rivers, kings leading armies, lovers embracing beneath celestial signs. Writing expands human memory beyond the fragile boundaries of spoken words. You step into a dim chamber lit by oil lamps. The air smells of ink and damp clay. Scrolls of papyrus line shelves, their surfaces crinkled but alive with symbols. Scribes murmur softly as they copy texts, their fingers blackened with soot. Here, history ceases to be fleeting. It becomes tangible, a voice pressed into permanence. But permanence comes at a cost. Not everyone can read or write. Literacy is power, and those who wield it guard their skills jealously. A merchant bows deeply to a scribe, desperate to have a contract recorded. Knowledge itself is becoming currency. And then there are the dramas of interpretation. You imagine future scholars puzzling over faded marks, arguing whether a passage means harvest festival or mandatory tax. Miscommunication, it turns out, survives translation just fine. Still, there's wonder in these first scratches of ink and clay. Through them, time collapses. You can hear the voices of people who lived thousands of years before you, their worries, prayers, and shopping lists preserved against forgetting. In that sense, writing is a kind of immortality, though sometimes a rather mundane one. You leave the chamber with the faint smell of ink clinging to your fingers, aware that from now on, humanity's words will echo not just in memory, but in marks that outlast their makers. You step out of the archive's dusty air and into a crowded street, where voices rise in panic. A man coughs violently, collapses, and the people nearby scatter in fear. The invisible companions of civilization have arrived, plagues, spreading along the very networks that trade and writing made possible. The mainstream fact is that diseases like smallpox, measles, and plague flourished once humans lived in dense, settled communities. One of the earliest recorded pandemics, the plague of Athens in 430 BCE, devastated the city during wartime. The quirky tidbit: ancient Egyptians sometimes used crocodile dung mixed with honey as a form of medicinal paste, or in some cases, even as sunscreen. Imagine standing in the sun, slathered in reptile excrement, convinced you're invincible. Historians still argue whether early societies understood plagues as divine punishment, bad air, or simply bad luck. Priests offered sacrifices, healers brewed herbal concoctions, and communities built protective rituals. The explanations differed, but the dread was the same. You wander through narrow alleys thick with smoke and incense. The scent of burning sage competes with the harsher odor of sickness. Families keep their doors shut, while healers carry bundles of herbs, garlic, juniper, willow bark. Some treatments work modestly, others not at all. One poor soul swallows powdered emeralds, believing in their protective magic, only to look as green as the gemstone. And yet, amid the fear, resilience blooms. People care for one another, sharing broths, offering prayers, washing the sick with cool water. Communities discover which plants ease fevers, which poultices soothe wounds. Slowly, painfully, medicine advances, not in leaps but in stubborn, experimental stumbles. You sit beside a fire where a healer grinds bark into a bitter powder. They explain in hushed tones that this tree can ease pain. You recognize it as willow, the ancestor of aspirin, a small miracle wrapped in rough bark. Even in the darkest seasons, humans cling to curiosity, testing, learning, adapting. As the night deepens, bells toll for the dead, but the sound doesn't drown out the softer noises. A child's cough easing after herbs, neighbors whispering encouragement, someone singing a lullaby despite the grief. Humanity's battle with disease is ancient, but so too is the determination to endure. The lullaby fades, and you find yourself in a quieter courtyard where scrolls and instruments lie scattered across a table. Smoke curls from an oil lamp as a group of curious thinkers lean over their experiments. Tonight, disease and despair give way to something brighter, the flicker of science, curiosity formalized into method. The mainstream fact is that figures like Aristotle in Greece and scholars in ancient China and India laid the groundwork for systematic observation, though the modern scientific method wouldn't take shape until much later. The quirky tidbit. In Alexandria, ancient engineers built a steam-powered toy called the Aeolipile, a whirling sphere driven by jets of vapor. It was basically the first fidget spinner powered by physics. Historians still argue whether the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries was a sharp break from the past, or the slow accumulation of ancient and medieval insights. As you listen to scholars debate under starlight, you can sense both, flashes of novelty, but also echoes of wisdom handed down across centuries. You lean closer to a thinker mixing powders in a bronze bowl. The air smells acrid like crushed minerals. Across the courtyard, another scholar holds a polished lens to the sky, tracing the path of planets. Their companions argue heatedly. Are the stars divine beings, or balls of fire impossibly far away? Questions are multiplying faster than answers. Knowledge spreads not only through experiment but through conversation. Merchants carry herbs and ideas along trade routes. Monasteries copy ancient texts with patient devotion. Inventors tinker with gears and levers. You see trial and error everywhere. Medicine, astronomy, mathematics, even attempts to turn lead into gold. Alchemy may look misguided now, but in its smoky chambers, chemistry begins to stir. And then, centuries later, the fire burns hotter. Galileo peers through a telescope and sees moons circling Jupiter. Newton muses under an apple tree about gravity's pull. Curiosity has transformed from whispers around a courtyard to a symphony of discovery that will rewrite how humanity sees itself. Yet even here you notice the struggles. Knowledge threatens power. Some thinkers are celebrated, others silenced, accused of heresy or arrogance. The pursuit of truth is never simple and often dangerous. Still, the lamp on the courtyard table burns steadily, defiant against the night. As you drift onward, you realize science is less about grand eureka moments and more about persistence. The willingness to keep asking, keep testing, even when the answers are messy. Humanity's slow evolution isn't just biological anymore. It's intellectual, spiraling outward like a constellation etched across the sky. The courtyard lamp fades, replaced by the glow of something harsher. Furnace fires, chimney smoke, and the endless clatter of gears. You step into a city where the air is thick with soot, and the sky seems permanently gray. The Industrial Revolution is roaring, and humanity has traded the rhythm of fields for the grind of machines. The mainstream fact is that beginning in the late 18th century, steam engines, mechanized looms, and coal power transformed Britain and soon much of the world. The quirky tidbit. Early factory workers sometimes had to reset clocks by factory whistles rather than church bells. The original alarm app, only much louder and with more soot. Historians still argue whether industrialization was an overall blessing or curse. On one hand, it lifted millions out of subsistence and launched staggering innovations. On the other, it crammed workers into choking cities, turned rivers black and filled lungs with coal dust. As you walk down a cobblestone street, you cough into your sleeve, understanding both sides of the debate in a single breath. The city around you hums with relentless energy. Iron wheels grind, steam hisses, children dart between carts carrying coal. The smell of smoke, oil, and sweat clings to everything. You hear the rhythmic slam of looms inside a textile mill, the shouts of overseers urging workers to keep pace. Inside, men, women, and children labor side by side, their hands blistered, their backs bent. Progress, it seems, demands a heavy toll. And yet, wonder stirs here too. Train whistles echo across the countryside, shrinking distances that once took days into hours. Letters and goods fly faster than ever before. A farmer who once trudged behind an ox can now ride a locomotive, gazing in awe as landscapes blur past the window. But the human body protests. Soot lines nostrils, coughing racks chests, fingers lose their nimbleness after endless hours at machines. Doctors begin to notice new ailments. Black lung, factory fevers, the toll of repetitive strain. Humanity has rewired its environment faster than its biology can adapt. Still, amid the smoke and grime, curiosity refuses to die. Inventors dream up flying machines, electric lights, and telegraphs that carry words at the speed of thought. The city is choking, but it is also buzzing, alive with possibility. You stand at a crossroads, realizing that this era is not just about machines. It's about humans learning again to live with what they've built. The factory smoke clears into a battlefield haze. You blink, and the world is thundering with the clash of cannons, the rattle of rifles, and the cries of soldiers who seem far too young. Industrial power has found a darker application: war on a global scale. Nations rise, borders harden, and humanity learns that its ingenuity can destroy as quickly as it creates. The mainstream fact is that the 20th century saw 2 world wars that killed tens of millions, reshaping politics, technology, and even the map itself. The quirky tidbit: during World War II, pigeons were fitted with tiny cameras to take reconnaissance photos, spy drones before drones existed, except a bit messier. Historians still argue whether global conflicts were inevitable products of nationalism and resource competition, or tragic accidents of diplomacy and ego. As you stand in the mud of a trench, surrounded by barbed wire, it's hard to imagine inevitability, just the grinding misery of survival. The air smells of damp earth, smoke, and fear. You move across decades in a few steps. Trenches give way to bombed-out cities, then mushroom clouds rise into the sky. The pace of destruction accelerates with technology. One invention after another, machine guns, tanks, atomic bombs, reshapes the battlefield and etches scars into the collective memory. Yet even here, survival persists. Soldiers huddle together, sharing songs and jokes in the lulls. Civilians plant victory gardens, ration food, and cling to scraps of normalcy. The resilience you saw around prehistoric campfires still glimmers amid rubble and ruins. You overhear voices debating the future. Some dream of peace treaties and global cooperation. Others plot revenge and dominance. The same species that painted bison on cave walls now drafts charters for the United Nations, trying, awkwardly, imperfectly, to prevent further catastrophe. And here's the strange truth: war accelerates change. Radar, antibiotics, jet engines, even computers leap forward under the pressure of survival. Humanity invents in self-defense, then retools those inventions for daily life. Your smartphone owes part of its ancestry to wartime code breakers and engineers. Grim irony, yes, but also proof of stubborn adaptability. As the smoke clears, you realize humanity's story isn't just about conflict. It's about staggering endurance. Even in the ruins, people rebuild, write poems, fall in love, and dare to hope. Survival, as always, remains the thread that ties it all together. The rubble settles, and when the dust lifts, you find yourself staring not at battlefields but at glowing screens. Wires snake across desks, phones buzz in pockets, and thumbs twitch restlessly. Humanity has entered the digital age, where survival no longer means escaping predators but keeping up with notifications. The mainstream fact is that the late 20th century saw the explosive rise of computers, the internet and mobile devices, tools that connect billions in real time. The quirky tidbit: the very first emoji was created in Japan in 1999, a tiny pixelated smile that has since multiplied into thousands of icons. Prehistoric cave painters would probably have approved. Historians still argue whether this constant connectivity enriches human life or erodes it. On one hand, the world is closer than ever. You can video chat across continents in seconds. On the other, attention spans fray, patience shrinks, and the glow of screens replaces the glow of campfires. You sit in a dim room lit only by blue light, and the hum of a computer feels eerily like the hum of insects outside a cave thousands of years ago. The sensory landscape is overwhelming. The clack of keyboards, the buzz of routers, the faint static of earbuds. People scroll endlessly, half smiling at memes, half frowning at news feeds. Conversations fly faster than thought, yet sometimes feel emptier than the whispered stories by firelight. And yet, you notice the parallels. Social media gossip isn't so different from village rumor mills. Viral videos echo the ancient impulse to perform, to entertain, to share. Technology is simply amplifying instincts that have been with humanity since those first awkward words. Of course, there's a cost. Posture suffers from endless slouching. Eyes strain against glowing screens, and anxiety pulses with every notification ding. You wonder whether our brains, sculpted for slow savannas, can truly thrive in this torrent of information. But you also see resilience here. Online communities form across oceans. Friendships bloom in unlikely places. Knowledge spreads faster than disease ever did. The same adaptability that carried humanity through plagues and wars now rewires itself for gigabytes and bandwidth. As you lean back, the screen's glow softening on your eyelids, you realize that even in this restless digital hum, humanity is still doing what it always has: telling stories, sharing fears, laughing at jokes, and trying somehow to connect. The screens dim, the chatter quiets, and you feel yourself floating toward a horizon that's hazy with uncertainty. Tomorrow's sapiens stand in the doorway of futures no one can fully predict. Cities glimmer with neon, labs hum with machines that can edit DNA, rockets crouch on launch pads, ready to fling humans back into the cosmos. The question drifts through your mind: what comes after Homo Sapiens? The mainstream fact is that scientists have already mapped the human genome, and technologies like CRISPR allow us to alter it in ways unthinkable even a generation ago. The quirky tidbit: some futurists have speculated about humans adapting to space by evolving, or engineering, extra eyelids to shield against cosmic radiation. Fashionable and functional. Historians still argue whether the next great evolutionary leap will come from nature's slow hand or from our own tinkering. Will we drift into gradual changes, like taller frames or sharper immune systems, or will we sculpt ourselves deliberately, choosing eye color, lifespan, even intelligence? You watch as possibilities swirl like smoke, both thrilling and unsettling. The sensory landscape of this imagined tomorrow is strange. Streets buzz not only with cars but with drones hovering overhead. Homes whisper with artificial assistants, voices disembodied but oddly familiar. Some people slip on headsets and vanish into digital worlds, their bodies present but their minds elsewhere. Others step into clean white labs, staring at petri dishes that might hold the seeds of new organs or perhaps new species. You sense both hope and fragility here. On one hand, the chance to cure diseases, to explore stars, to outlive the limits of flesh. On the other, the risk of division, inequality, or mistakes written directly into the blueprint of life. Evolution has always been slow, but humans now toy with the accelerator. No one knows whether the ride ends in brilliance or in wreckage. And yet some things remain constant. A child still laughs at a silly face. Friends still share meals, whether around campfires or kitchen tables. Lovers still carve their names into something permanent, hopping to be remembered. Beneath the chrome and circuitry, the ancient heartbeat of humanity continues. As you drift further into this foggy horizon, you realize that the story of Homo sapiens isn't finished. It never will be. Evolution doesn't stop. It only changes tempo. The next chapter may be written in DNA, in silicon, or in the stars, but it will still carry echoes of stone tools, firelight, and painted hands. And so, the long walk of humanity, from the forests of Africa to the glowing screens of today, begins to soften in your mind. The edges blur, the noise quiets, and the pace slows into something gentler. You let go of the sharp clang of factories, the smoke of fires, the arguments of kings and scholars. What remains is the steady hum of continuity, the knowledge that humans have always found a way forward, step by patient step. Picture yourself back at the campfire, only this time the flames are steady, the air calm. Shadows dance across stone walls, not with urgency, but with reassurance. The painted hands you once saw on cave walls feel less like a mystery and more like a greeting. Ancestors reaching across time to remind you that survival is not just about struggle, but about connection. The world outside may rush, but here, in this soft cocoon of reflection, everything is slower, quieter. You hear the whisper of grasses in ancient fields, the lap of waves against wooden boats, the sigh of wind through the rafters of early villages. Each sound melts into the next, forming a lullaby older than language itself. Even the uncertainties of the future seem less daunting now. Tomorrow's sapiens will face their challenges, just as yesterday's did. And if history teaches anything, it's that adaptation and imagination always endure. You can let those questions drift into the night, knowing they don't require answers right now. So breathe deeply. Let your shoulders soften. Feel the thread of humanity as a warm, unbroken line stretching through you. The journey is vast, but for this moment it can rest. And so can you.